The first time they called him girl in the mess hall, Elias froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth, the words slicing through the din of clattering trays like a blade. He was 19, barely a month into his sentence at Coldwater State Penitentiary, and already the walls felt like they were closing in, each jeer a brick sealing him inside. By the time the guards looked away, smirking, he'd learned to keep his head down, his truth buried deeper than the roots of the oak tree he'd once climbed as a kid in rural Ohio. Elias had always known who he was. Growing up as Ellie, he'd felt the dissonance, early his body a mismatched suit, his reflection a stranger. At 16, he'd cut his hair, bound his chest, and told his mother his name was Elias. She'd cried, not out of rejection but fear, knowing the world wasn't kind to boys like him. She was right. A year later, a botched convenience store robbery born of desperation to afford hormones landed him here, in a men's prison where his truth was a liability. The guards didn't care about his identity. To them, he was a number, a file, a body to be processed. To the inmates, he was a target, his slight frame and soft features earning him the label girl in a place where weakness was blood in the water. Coldwater was a labyrinth of concrete and despair, a maximum security facility in upstate New York where hope was contraband. Elias learned to navigate it by disappearing. He spoke little, ate quickly, and worked in the laundry room, where the hum of machines drowned out the taunts. His days blurred into a gray routine: wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. At night, he'd lie on his bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling, imagining a life where he could walk into a room and be seen as himself. Not a mistake. But imagination was a dangerous thing here. It made the walls feel tighter. Then came Jude. Jude Callahan swaggered into Coldwater like he owned it, a 22-year-old with a rap sheet longer than most inmate sentences. He'd been transferred from a facility in Pennsylvania after a fight that left 3 men hospitalized. Rumors followed him. He'd stolen cars, hustled drugs, and once outrun a police chopper on a motorcycle. His dark curls fell into eyes that held a spark of defiance, and his crooked smile seemed to dare the world to take a swing. To Elias, Jude was a storm, unpredictable and electric, the kind of man who could either save you or destroy you. Their first encounter was in the laundry room, 6 months into Elias's sentence. Elias was folding sheets, his hands moving mechanically, when Jude leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him. "You're the quiet one," Jude said, his voice low, teasing but not cruel. Elias flinched, expecting a jab, but Jude just grinned. "Don't worry, man. I don't bite. Not unless you ask." The words hung in the air, light but loaded, and Elias felt something shift a crack in the armor he'd built. Over the next weeks, Jude became a constant. He'd show up at the laundry room, cracking jokes, telling stories of his life outside, stealing his first car at 15, kissing a boy under a boardwalk at 17. Elias listened, guarded but curious, drawn to Jude's reckless honesty. Jude never asked about Elias's past, but his gaze lingered, like he saw more than Elias wanted to show. One day, as they sorted towels, Jude's hand brushed Elias's, and neither pulled away. The touch was brief, electric, a secret shared in the hum of the machines. But Coldwater wasn't a place for secrets. The other inmates noticed Jude's attention, and the whispers grew sharper. "Girl's got a boyfriend," they'd sneer, their voices dripping with venom. Elias felt the weight of their stares, the threat of violence lurking in every corner. He wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of invisibility. But Jude was relentless. "You don't get to hide," he said one night, sitting on Elias's bunk after lights out, his voice barely a whisper. Not from me. Elias's heart raced. He wanted to tell Jude everything about the boy he'd been, the man he was becoming, the fear that choked him every day. But words felt like a trap, each one a step closer to exposure. Jude didn't push, but his presence was a challenge, a dare to be seen. And for the first time in years, Elias wanted to take it. By the time the first snow fell, their connection had deepened, unspoken but undeniable. They'd steal moments in the laundry room, their conversations a lifeline in the gray. Jude would talk about the ocean, how he'd swim in it one day, free. Elias would share fragments of his own dreamsel life, where his name wasn't a question, where his body wasn't a battleground. But the prison was a pressure cooker, and every touch, every glance, was a risk. When a guard caught them standing too close, his baton tapped against his palm. A warning. "Keep it clean, boys," he said, his eyes lingering on Elias, heavy with implication. The tension was building, a storm gathering on the horizon. Elias knew it couldn't last Jude's defiance, their stolen moments, the fragile hope they'd built. Coldwater didn't allow hope, not for long. And when the first fight broke out in the yard, with Jude at the center, Elias felt the ground shift beneath him, knowing their story was about to collide with the brutal reality of the world they lived in. The fight erupted like a spark in a powder keg, the yard a chaos of shouts and fists. Jude was in the middle, his knuckles bloodied, facing off against a hulking inmate named Carver who'd been itching for a reason to take him down. Elias watched from the edge, his heart pounding, knowing Jude's bravado had finally crossed a line. Carver had heard the rumors, the taunts about Jude and his girl, and he'd made it personal. "You think you're tough, Callahan?" Carver roared, swinging. Jude ducked, fast and fearless, but the guards were already closing in, batons raised. Elias wanted to scream, to pull Jude back, but he stayed frozen, invisible as always. The fight ended with Jude and Carver in solitary, and the yard buzzed with new gossip. Elias felt the eyes on him, the whispers sharper now, cutting deeper. He retreated to the laundry room, the only place he felt safe. But even there, the air was heavy with dread. Jude was gone for a week, and in that time, Elias's world shrank smaller, the walls of Coldwater tighter than ever. When Jude returned, he was quieter, his smile less bright, but his eyes still burned with that reckless spark. He found Elias in the laundry room, his wrist bruised from the cuffs, and sat beside him without a word. "You okay?" Elias finally asked, his voice barely above the hum of the machines. Jude nodded, but his jaw was tight. "Carver's got a crew," he said. "They're coming for us." "For you." The words hit Elias like a punch. He'd spent years hiding, but Jude's presence had made him visible, a target in a way he'd never been before. The prison was a chessboard, and Elias was a pawn caught in a dangerous game. Jude, though, was a knight, always moving, always fighting. He started teaching Elias how to survive, not just to hide, but to stand. In the quiet moments, he'd show Elias how to throw a punch, how to read a room, how to carry himself like he wasn't afraid. "You're not a girl," Jude said one night, his voice fierce. "You're Elias. Own it." The words were a lifeline, but they also terrified him. Owning himself meant risking everything. Their bond grew in stolen moments, brushing hands in the laundry room, whispering in the dark after lights out. Jude told Elias about his life before prison, about growing up in a Philly foster home, running wild to escape the system's grip. Elias shared his own story, haltingly at first, about the boy who dreamed of being whole, about the mother who'd loved him but couldn't protect him. Each confession was a brick removed from the wall between them, But the prison's shadow loomed larger every day. Carver's crew was relentless. They'd corner Elias in the showers. Their taunts a chorus of girl and worse. Jude was always there, stepping between them, his defiance a shield. But it came at a cost. Jude was sent to solitary again after another fight, and Elias was left alone, the weight of his fear crushing him. He started to pull back, skipping meals to avoid the mess hall, working extra shifts in the laundry room to stay out of sight. But Jude's absence was a void, and Elias realized how much he'd come to rely on him not just for protection, but for the way Jude saw him, really saw him. When Jude returned, he was different, harder, angrier. "You can't keep hiding," he told Elias, his voice sharp. "They'll eat you alive if you do." Elias wanted to argue, to say he'd survived this long by being invisible. But Jude's eyes held a truth he couldn't deny. They were in this together now, whether Elias wanted it or not. That night, Jude reached for his hand, and Elias didn't pull away. It was the first time he'd felt truly alive in years. But the fear was still there, a shadow that never left. The prison's annual inspection was coming, a rare moment when the outside world peeked in. Elias heard whispers of a new policy, something about transgender inmates. But he didn't dare hope. Coldwater was a machine, grinding down anything that didn't fit. Still, Jude latched onto the news, his mind racing with possibilities. "We could use this," he said, his voice low, plotting. "Get you out of here, or at least into a better place." Elias didn't believe it. But Jude's optimism was infectious, a spark in the dark. As the inspection neared, the tension in Coldwater grew unbearable. Carver's crew was planning something, their stares heavier, their threats bolder. Elias felt the storm closing in, and Jude's defiance was no longer enough to keep it at bay. One night, in the laundry room, Jude kissed him quick, desperate, a promise and a risk. Elias's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from something deeper, something he hadn't dared name. "We're getting out of this," Jude whispered. "Together." But Elias wasn't sure if he believed in together, not in a place like Coldwater. The inspection brought a flurry of activity to Coldwater, a facade of order masking the chaos beneath. Guards polished their boots. Inmates were warned to behave, and the air buzzed with a nervous energy. Elias felt it in his bones, a mix of dread and fragile hope. Jude was relentless, whispering plans in the dark ways to use the inspection to their advantage, to get Elias recognized as himself, not the girl the prison saw. But Elias's fear was a weight, heavier than ever. He'd heard stories of inmates who'd spoken up, only to be silenced by violence or solitary. Carver's crew struck in the showers, a calculated ambush. Elias was cornered, his back against the cold tiles, their voices a barrage of hate. "Where's your boyfriend now, girl?" One sneered, shoving him. Elias's fists clenched, Jude's lessons echoing in his mind. But he was outnumbered. The blows came fast, a fist to his stomach, a knee to his ribs. He curled into himself, protecting his face, his mind screaming to survive. The guards were slow to intervene, their laughter echoing as they finally pulled the attackers away. Elias spent the night in the infirmary, his body bruised but his spirit cracked. When Jude found him, his eyes blazed with fury. "I'm going to kill them," he hissed, pacing the small room. Elias grabbed his arm, his voice weak but firm. "Don't. You'll only make it worse." Jude's jaw tightened, but he stayed, sitting beside Elias's cot, his hand resting on Elias's like an anchor. It was the first time Elias felt safe, even in pain, and it scared him how much he needed it. The inspection came and went, A fleeting moment of scrutiny that changed nothing. The rumors of a transgender policy were just that, rumors. Coldwater remained a machine, indifferent to Elias's truth. But Jude refused to let it go. He started talking to a sympathetic guard, a young woman named Officer Reyes, who'd overheard their conversations in the laundry room. She was cautious but kind, slipping Elias a pamphlet about inmate rights, her eyes saying what her words couldn't. "You're not alone," the pamphlet seemed to promise, but Elias wasn't sure he believed it. Jude's defiance grew bolder, reckless. He'd confront Carver's crew in the yard, his voice loud, drawing attention. "You got a problem? Say it to my face." He'd taunt, his body coiled like a spring. Elias begged him to stop, but Jude was a force, unstoppable. "I'm not letting them break you," he said one night, his voice raw. "Or us." The word us hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elias wanted to believe in it, but Coldwater had taught him that hope was a trap. Their relationship deepened, a quiet rebellion against the prison's cruelty. They'd steal kisses in the laundry room, their hands lingering in the dark. Jude would talk about the Futuria house by the ocean, a life where they could be free. Elias would listen, his heart aching with the weight of dreams that felt impossible. But Jude's certainty was a lifeline, pulling him forward even when he wanted to give up. Carver's crew wasn't done. They targeted Jude next, catching him in the yard during a rare moment when Elias wasn't there. The fight was brutal, Jude's defiance no match for their numbers. When Elias saw him in the infirmary, his face swollen and his arm in a sling, something in him broke. "This is my fault," Elias whispered, guilt choking him. Jude shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No. It's theirs. And we're not done fighting." Officer Reyes became their ally, quietly passing them information, helping them navigate the system. She told them about a lawyer in Albany who took on cases like theirs, someone who could push for Elias's rights. It was a long shot, but Jude latched onto it, his optimism a spark in the dark. "We're getting you out," he said, his eyes fierce. "And I'm coming with you." Elias wanted to believe him, but the prison was a maze, and every step forward felt like a step toward danger. As winter deepened, so did the threats. Carver's crew was planning something bigger, their whispers louder, their stares more menacing. Elias felt the storm closing in, and Jude's defiance was no longer enough to keep it at bay. One night, in the laundry room, Jude pulled Elias close, his voice a desperate whisper. "I love you," he said, the words raw and real. Elias's breath caught, his heart torn between fear and hope. He wanted to say it back, but the words stuck, trapped by the weight of the world around them. The words, "I love you," lingered in the air, a fragile thread in the chaos of Coldwater. Elias couldn't say them back. Not yet, but they changed everything. Jude's confession was a spark, igniting something in Elias he'd thought was long-dead hope, raw and terrifying. But hope in a place like this was a double-edged sword, and the blade was sharpening. Carver's crew was circling, their threats no longer whispers but promises, and Elias knew the next move would be blood. Jude's injuries kept him in the infirmary longer than before, and Elias felt the absence like a missing limb. He worked double shifts in the laundry room, avoiding the yard, the mess hall, anywhere Carver's crew could find him. But solitude was its own punishment. The other inmates' stares followed him, their taunts a constant hum. "Girls all alone now," they'd say, their laughter sharp. Elias kept his head down, but Jude's voice echoed in his mind. Own it. He wasn't sure he could. Officer Reyes became their lifeline. She'd slip Elias notes from Jude, written on scraps of paper, each one a reminder of their plan. Albany lawyer. We're getting there. One read. In Jude's messy scrawl. Reyes also brought news. The lawyer, a woman named Sarah Klein, had taken an interest in Elias's case. She was building a file, arguing for Elias's transfer to a facility with better protections for transgender inmates. It was a flicker of light in the dark, but Elias didn't trust it. Coldwater had a way of snuffing out light. When Jude returned, he was a shadow of himself, thinner, quieter, but still defiant. He found Elias in the laundry room, his arm still in a sling, and pulled him into a hug that felt like a promise. We're close, he whispered. Klein's coming next week. Elias wanted to believe him, but fear was a tide, pulling him under. He'd spent years hiding, and now Jude was asking him to stand in the open, to fight for a truth the world didn't want to see. The meeting with Sarah Klein was a risk. Reyes arranged it in a small office, away from prying eyes. Klein was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, her voice steady but warm. She listened as Elias told his story, haltingly at first, about growing up as Ellie, about the robbery, about the prison's cruelty. Jude sat beside him, silent but steady, his presence a shield. Klein took notes, her pen moving fast. You have a case, she said finally. It won't be easy, but we can fight for a transfer, maybe even a sentence reduction. Elias felt a spark of hope, but it was fragile, easily crushed. Carver's crew didn't wait. They struck in the yard, a coordinated attack that left Jude bleeding and Elias with a split lip. The guards were slow again, their batons idle until the damage was done. Jude was sent to solitary, and Elias was left alone, his body aching, his mind racing. He hated himself for dragging Jude into this, for letting their connection make them targets. But he also hated the prison, the system, the world that forced him to hide who he was. Reyes stepped up, risking her job to protect them. She moved Elias to a different cell block, away from Carver's crew, and arranged for Jude to join him when he got out of solitary. It was a temporary fix, but it gave them time. In their new cell, they'd lie on their bunks, whispering plans for a future that felt like a dream. Jude would talk about the ocean again, about swimming under the stars. Elias would talk about a world where he could be himself, where his name was enough. They'd hold hands in the dark, their fingers intertwined, a quiet rebellion against the walls around them. But the walls were closing in. Carver's crew had allies, inmates who owed them favors, and the guards weren't always watching. Elias felt the pressure building, a storm about to break. Klein's visit had given them hope, but it also made them vulnerable. The other inmates knew something was up, and the whispers turned to threats. You think you're getting out, girl? One hissed in the mess hall. Elias kept his eyes on his tray, but his hands shook. Jude was released from solitary just as Klein returned with news. She'd filed a motion for Elias's transfer. It was a small victory, but it came with a cost. The prison was a powder keg, and their hope was the spark. That night, Jude pulled Elias close, his voice fierce. We're gonna make it, he said. You and me. Elias wanted to believe him, but the fear was a weight, heavier than ever. He leaned into Jude, their foreheads touching, and for a moment, the world was just them. The motion for Elias's transfer was a beacon, but it cast long shadows. Coldwater buzzed with tension, the inmates' whispers now a roar. Carver's crew was bolder, their threats no longer veiled. You're not leaving, girl. One spat as Elias passed in the hall, his voice low and venomous. Elias kept moving, his heart pounding, but the fear was a constant now, a second pulse. Jude was back, But he was different, his defiance tempered by pain. His eyes haunted but still burning. They clung to their routine, finding solace in the laundry room's hum. Jude would talk about Klein's progress, about the possibility of a new facility, one that might see Elias as himself. But Elias couldn't shake the dread. He'd seen what happened to inmates who hoped too much, who dared to dream of a way out. Coldwater was a machine, and it didn't let go easily. Still, Jude's optimism was a lifeline, pulling Elias forward even when he wanted to retreat. Reyes was their guardian now, risking everything to keep them safe. She'd warned them of Carver's movements, slipped them extra time in the laundry room, even passed messages to Klein. But her help came with a warning: you're on thin ice. Both of you. Elias knew she was right. The prison was a chessboard, and they were running out of moves. Carver's crew was planning something big, and the guards' indifference was a silent endorsement. One night, in their cell, Jude broke the silence. If we get out, where do you want to go? His voice was soft, almost fragile. Elias hesitated, then whispered, somewhere quiet. A small town, maybe, where no one cares who I am. Jude smiled, his hand finding Elias's in the dark. I'll take you to the ocean first. You've never seen it, have you? Elias shook his head, his throat tight. The idea of a future with Jude was a dream, but dreams were dangerous here. The attack came in the laundry room, a place that had once been their sanctuary. Carver and 3 others cornered them, their faces twisted with hate. Jude stepped in front, his body a shield, but they were outnumbered. The fight was brutal: fists, boots, a flash of metal. Elias fought back, his fear giving way to fury, but it wasn't enough. By the time the guards arrived, Jude was on the ground, blood pooling beneath him, and Elias was pinned, a knife at his throat. You're next, girl, Carver hissed before the guards dragged him away. Jude was rushed to the infirmary, his condition critical. Elias was locked in his cell, his body bruised, his mind a storm of guilt and fear. He hadn't been fast enough, strong enough. He'd let Jude down. Reyes came to him that night, her face grim. He's stable, but it's bad, she said. Klein's pushing harder now. This attack, it's evidence. We can use it. Elias nodded, but his heart was heavy. Evidence meant nothing if Jude didn't make it. The days that followed were a blur. Elias was moved to protective custody, a small victory that felt like a cage. He was safe from Carver's crew, but he was alone, cut off from Jude, from the world. Reyes brought updates. Jude was conscious, healing, but still in danger. Klein was building a case, using the attack to argue for Elias's transfer and Jude's safety. It was a flicker of hope, but Elias couldn't trust it. He'd seen too much. When he finally saw Jude again, it was through a glass partition in the infirmary. Jude was pale, his arm bandaged, but his smile was still there, crooked and defiant. Told you we'd make it, he said, his voice weak but steady. Elias pressed his hand to the glass, tears burning his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. Jude shook his head. Don't be. We're still here. The words were a promise, but Elias knew the fight wasn't over. Klein's case gained traction, the attack shining a spotlight on Coldwater's failures. Activists outside the prison picked up the story, their voices loud enough to reach the news. Elias's name was out there, his truth exposed to the world. It was terrifying, but it also felt like a weight lifting. He wasn't invisible anymore. But with visibility came danger, and Carver's crew wasn't done. The prison was a powder keg, and Elias knew the next explosion could destroy everything. The news coverage was a double-edged sword, giving Elias hope but painting a target on his back. Coldwater was under scrutiny, the administration scrambling to save face. But the inmates were restless, their anger a living thing. Carver's crew was quieter now, their movements watched, but Elias knew they were biding their time. Jude was still in the infirmary, his recovery slow, and Elias felt the distance between them like a wound that wouldn't heal. Reyes was their anchor, risking her career to keep them connected. She'd smuggle notes from Jude, his words a lifeline, keep fighting. Elias. We're almost there. Klein was pushing harder, her case now a federal matter, arguing not just for Elias's transfer, but for systemic change. The idea of change felt surreal, a dream too big for Coldwater's walls. Elias wanted to believe in it, but fear was his constant companion, whispering that hope was a lie. In protective custody, Elias had time to think too much time. He thought about his mother, about the boy he'd been, about the man he was becoming. He thought about Jude, about the way his smile lit up the dark, about the love he hadn't dared name. He wrote letters to Jude, pouring out his heart on scraps of paper, knowing they might never be read. I love you, he wrote finally, the words a release, a truth he couldn't hold back anymore. When Jude was released from the infirmary, he was different, thinner, slower, but his eyes still burned with defiance. They were allowed a supervised visit, a small room with a guard at the door. Jude reached for Elias's hand, his grip weak but steady. We're getting out, he said, his voice raw. Klein's close. I can feel it. Elias wanted to believe him, but the prison was a machine, and they were caught in its gears. The administration was cracking down, desperate to quell the unrest. Carver's crew was split up, some sent to solitary, others transferred. It was a temporary reprieve, but Elias knew it wouldn't last. The other inmates were watching, their loyalty to Carver stronger than their fear of the guards. Elias felt the tension building, a storm about to break. He and Jude were running out of time. Klein's next visit brought news. The judge was considering her motion, swayed by the media pressure and the evidence of violence. She'd secured a hearing, a chance for Elias to tell his story. It was a victory, but it came with a price. The hearing would expose him further, make him a symbol in a fight he hadn't chosen. Jude was relentless, pushing Elias to see it through. This is bigger than us, he said. You're not just fighting for you. You're fighting for everyone like you. The hearing was set for a month away, a lifetime in Coldwater. Elias and Jude clung to their routine, finding solace in the small moments, whispered conversations, stolen touches. But the prison was a pressure cooker, and the threats were growing. One night, a note was slipped under their cell door. The words scrawled in jagged ink, "You're dead, girl." Elias's heart stopped, but Jude tore the note to pieces, his face a mask of fury. They don't get to win, he said, pulling Elias close. Reyes warned them to stay vigilant, her face grim. She'd heard rumors of a planned attack, bigger than before. The administration was distracted, focused on the hearing and the media spotlight. Elias felt the walls closing in, the air thick with danger. He and Jude were together, but they were also alone, two against a world that wanted to break them. The night before the hearing, Jude pulled Elias into a corner of the laundry room, his hands cupping Elias's face. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, we're in this together. Elias nodded, his throat tight, and finally said the words he'd held back for so long. I love you, Jude. The kiss that followed was desperate, a promise in a world that offered none. But as they pulled apart, The sound of footsteps echoed outside, and Elias knew the storm was here. The hearing was a lifeline, but it felt like a trap. Elias sat in a small courtroom, his wrist cuffed, Klein at his side, her face calm but determined. Jude was there too, in the back, his presence a steadying force. The judge listened as Klein laid out the case, the violence, the misgendering, the prison's failure to protect Elias as a transgender man. Elias spoke, his voice shaking but clear, telling his story, the boy he'd been, the man he was, the fear that had defined his life in cold water. The room was silent, the weight of his words heavy. Outside, the media frenzy grew, activists chanting for justice, their signs a blur of color through the courthouse windows. Elias felt exposed, his truth laid bare for the world to judge. But he also felt seen, for the first time in years. The judge's face was unreadable, but Klein was optimistic. "We've got a shot," she whispered as they waited for the ruling. Elias glanced at Jude, his crooked smile a beacon in the storm. The ruling came swiftly. Elias would be transferred to a facility with better protections, his sentence reevaluated. It was a victory, but it came with a catch: to be moved immediately, separated from Jude. Elias's heart sank, the joy of the win drowned by the fear of losing the one person who'd made him feel alive. Jude grabbed his hand before the guards pulled them apart, his voice fierce. "Find me when you're out. I'll be waiting." The transfer was a blur. A new prison in Massachusetts. Smaller, cleaner, with staff trained to handle transgender inmates. Elias was called by his name, his identity respected, but the victory was hollow without Jude. He wrote letters, sent through Klein, but the replies were slow, censored by Coldwater's guards. Each day without Jude was a reminder of what he'd left behind, and the guilt was a weight he couldn't shake. Back in Coldwater, Jude was fighting his own battles. Carver's crew was fractured, but the prison was still a jungle, and Jude's defiance made him a target. Reyes kept him safe as best she could, but her influence was limited. Jude poured his heart into letters to Elias, writing about the ocean, about the life they'd built. But the letters were a risk, and he knew it. Coldwater didn't forgive, and Jude was running out of allies. Elias settled into the new facility, his days quieter, safer, but empty. He worked in the library, reading books about freedom, about love, about lives he could only imagine. He thought about Jude constantly, his smile, his voice, the way he'd made Elias feel like he could be himself. The guilt was a shadow, whispering that he'd abandoned Jude, that his freedom had come at a cost. Klein visited, bringing news. Jude's case was gaining attention, his role in Elias's fight making him a symbol too. Activists were pushing for his release, arguing that his actions in Coldwater protecting Elias, defying the system, deserved leniency. Elias clung to the hope, but he knew the system was slow, cruel, and unforgiving. He wrote to Jude every day, his words a lifeline across the miles. One night, a letter arrived, smuggled past the censors. Jude's handwriting was shaky, but his voice was clear. "I'm proud of you," he wrote. "You're free, Elias. Live for both of us." The words broke something in Elias, tears falling as he read them again and again. He vowed to fight for Jude, to make their dream real. But the prison's shadow was long, and Elias knew the fight was far from over. As spring broke, Elias heard whispers of trouble in Coldwater. A riot, sparked by the administration's crackdowns, had left the prison in chaos. Jude was in the middle, his defiance a spark in the powder keg. Elias's heart raced, fear and hope warring within him. He contacted Klein, begging her to help, to get Jude out before it was too late. The future they dreamed of was so close. But Coldwater was a machine, and it didn't let go easily. The riot in Coldwater was a wildfire, burning through the prison's fragile order. Jude was caught in the chaos, his defiance a beacon for some, a target for others. Elias, miles away, felt the panic like a vice around his chest. He spent his days in the new facility's library, poring over news articles, calling Klein, begging for updates. The reports were grim: injuries, lockdowns, and a system stretched to its breaking point. Jude's name was a whisper in the chaos, his fate uncertain. Klein worked tirelessly, leveraging the media attention to push for Jude's release. The activists outside Coldwater were louder now, their voices a chorus for change. Elias joined them, writing letters to the press, telling their story his and Jude's. A love forged in the dark, a fight for survival. He was no longer invisible, his voice stronger, his truth a weapon. But every day without news of Jude was a wound, and Elias feared the worst. Weeks passed, the riot quelled, but Coldwater was a ghost town, its inmates scattered, its guards under investigation. Klein brought news: Jude was alive, injured but safe, transferred to a lower security facility. Elias's relief was a flood, tears falling as he clutched the letter Jude had sent. "I'm coming for you," it read, his crooked smile almost visible in the words. Elias held on to it, a promise of the future they dreamed of. Jude's transfer was a turning point. The new facility was kinder, its staff more humane, and Jude's spirit unbroken. He wrote to Elias, his letters full of plans: the ocean, a small house, a life where they could be themselves. Elias wrote back, his words a vow to fight for their freedom, to make their dream real. Klein was building a case for Jude's parole, using his actions in Coldwater as evidence of his courage, his love. Elias was released first, his sentence reduced, his transfer a success. He stepped into the world a new man, his name his own, his identity no longer a secret. He moved to a small town in Maine, close to the ocean Jude loved, working in a bookstore, saving every penny for their future. The world was different now, kinder in some ways, cruel in others. But Elias was stronger, forged in Coldwater's fire. Jude's parole hearing came 6 months later. Elias was there, in the courtroom, his heart pounding as Jude spoke, his voice steady, his eyes finding Elias's in the crowd. The judge listened, moved by their story, by the love that had survived a place like Coldwater. When the gavel fell, granting Jude's parole, Elias felt the world shift, the walls of their past crumbling. They met on a beach in Maine, the ocean stretching before them, vast and free. Jude's smile was crooked, his eyes bright with the future. Elias took his hand, their fingers intertwined, and for the first time, they were just themselves, no labels, no walls, no fear. "We made it," Jude whispered, and Elias nodded, tears falling as he looked at the man who'd shown him how to live. Their life wasn't perfect. The world still had its edges, its cruelties, but they faced it together. Elias became an advocate, speaking for those still trapped in systems like Coldwater, while Jude worked as a mechanic, his hands steady, his heart open. They built a home, small but theirs, filled with laughter and love. And every night, as they watched the waves, Elias remembered the boy who'd hidden, the man who'd fought, and the love that had set him free.